Welcome, everybody. Really delighted to have Martin Armstrong. We've actually had an overlap of audiences that many people have regularly referenced him over the years. Martin's a very busy guy, and we're delighted to have actually got some of his time to share his economic views. What about Martin? Well, Martin actually, in the early 80s, was already involved in the establishment of artificial intelligence and had played a big role with that in hedge funds as well. Martin, welcome to the show. Delighted to have you on, and thank you very much for sharing your time.
Well, thank you for inviting me.
So we're in a very interesting, I would say almost probably the most precarious economic state of events at the moment. I feel like I'm waiting for a grand piano to fall on us, the collective economy of us, that is. How about you just give us your overall macro take generally in terms of how we're set up right now?
Well, really what's coming to a head is that governments ever since World War II, they have been borrowing year after year with no intention of ever paying anything back. And for the life of me, it's like, I really don't even get it anymore. They fight over the debt ceiling as if you're going to pay this stuff back anyhow. And I think what people don't really appreciate is that, they tend to blame the central banks most of the time, and that's just not correct. What happened really was during the Bretton Woods period, this theory that if you borrowed more rather than print, it would be less inflationary. So the caveat to that was that if you had like e-bonds or something like that, and you went down to the bank to try and borrow on them, they couldn't lend. It was illegal. So the bonds were, under that theory, less inflationary because they were not money.
Yeah.
Then after Bretton Woods collapsed in 1971, if you want to trade futures or something, you can post T-bills as collateral. So suddenly the bonds became just simply money that paid interest. So while everybody's still pointing at central bank, the central bank has no control over the fiscal side of the budget. And that's what's expanding dramatically. So, the Fed can try to reduce money supply, but it has no impact anymore because effectively they're just spending their way, down the tubes, really. It's not just the U.S., but all governments have been doing this.
Yeah. We refer to it as a leper colony almost of synchronized ailment, which is common to them all. And in essence, you're taking some of the blame off the people that set the price of money, the monetary policy, that is the central banks, and you're allocating it to the political system, which just has consistently overspent. In other words, we have a political system where everybody makes promises and everybody adds it on the tab of tomorrow, and we have an after me the storm type, Louis XV type approach, where someone else is going to have to deal with that, and we just keep piling it on and move away until eventually you start to reach, and this is where I feel we are, because the events of March 2020, it felt like that was peak bonds. And everything since then, there has been a systemic change. We will never get rates that low again in what we consider to be a bit of a hyper-stagflationary environment now, given the amount of proliferation. Have we crossed the Rubicon for you in terms of it's now a problem, debt and interest rates can never get as low again, and in actual fact, we're more likely to drift or continue or even go in a disorderly fashion in the opposite direction? What's your take in terms of that?
Yes, you have to understand that, first of all, at the core of that question is Keynesian economics. And that was basically that if we raise interest rates, we reduce the people's demand and they'll reduce their spending. All of that was done coming out of the Great Depression.
Yeah.
But people have to realize that when Keynes came up with that, we also had a balanced budget. We had a surplus. So in theory, raising interest rates, lowering interest rates, it did affect us. All right. It didn't affect the government so much. Now, when the government is the biggest borrower and the Fed raises interest rates to try and stop inflation, the politicians don't sit around and say, oh, gee, they want us to spend less. It has zero impact. So all it does is basically actually increases the deficits because they now have to spend more on interest to keep it rolling forward. So we've definitely crossed the Rubicon here where there's no going back. And on really what has made this a major crisis. And you're talking about the banking crisis, etc. It's worse in Europe than it is in the United States, mainly because you had Draghi take interest rates to negative in 2014.
Yeah.
So effectively for 8 years, any government bond was negative.
Yeah.
All right. Now all of a sudden those interest rates go up. Those bonds which banks in Europe had to buy for capitalization, etc., are all down anywhere from a third to 40% or more, depending upon the issue. So that's the same problem that we began to see in the U.S. with the collapse of SVB.
Yeah.
And that typically a bank borrows short term. So when you're depositing money, it's on a demand basis. You put money in your checking account, you can write out a check anytime. You're not there for, say, you can use my money for 5 years or 10 years. All right, that's like a CD. So the banks borrow short term like that, but they lend long term. There used to be a good spread. All right, and so then a bank gets in trouble when everybody starts running and they want their cash. But the bank had already lent it out long term. It's not that they lost it. But now if you then try to start selling all these assets long term, then the price goes down. And in this case, they were buying, 30-year bonds, etc. And the yield curve just collapsed on them.
I was going to mention that, given especially as you mentioned the time zones across debt, we have probably the most violent and sharpest reversal in the yield curve since the 80s. It's taken out the lows of the subprime crisis. On most measures, you can use the Fed's favorite measure, but you can look at most of the various long terms against the shorter term rates. How does this, the assumption on my side, and I don't know if your opinion coincides with that or differs in any way, but surely and we say this very much in technically, the harsher the collapse, and the deeper, the geometric almost likelihood of a greater subsequent snapback and also scale of event. Are we not at the precipice of something pretty beastly?
Yes. And then on top of all that, you have this reckless spending in Ukraine they just want to conquer Russia, basically. And there's no limits, no accountability to anything. You take that after COVID spending. It's just like there's just no, I would say fiscal responsibility at any level anymore. They just don't seem to think that they even have to do so. They can just print whatever they want, spend whatever they want, and there's no consequence to it.
But it feels, the fact that there's no consequence and everybody's looking past it feels like the tab on the bar on the Titanic. Literally, you may as well put whatever you want on it. It's never going to see the light of day, and things are about to get rinsed and reset. So that brings the whole reset economics and the tokenization of new money system that will be put to us, etc. That feels where we are on the debt. It's almost a case of you rush to put more on it because you can secure physical assets that you will carry over and bridge, or at least the insiders will, on the basis that there is no that money and that debt is not going to see the light of day, and you will actually be the owner of those assets subsequently. How do you see that? Because there's a new system waiting to be birthed here, surely.
Yes, I mean, I live in Florida, and I get, I would say, at least 3 phone calls a week. Gee, would you like to sell your house? And no, thank you. Where am I going to go? Chicago? Um, it's just ridiculous. Although real estate is declining in places like New York, Chicago, and California, you go to the States, we also have a migration issue where
Yeah.
people are leaving the North and going to the South. And I mean, houses down here that they go on the market and they're still gone within 2 or 3 days. So it's a lot of people, I think, trying to get basically what we call off the grid.
Yeah.
I spoke to a local realtor that I know, and he said houses that are, basically over 1 million, 2 million, 3 million, they're selling for cash.
Yeah.
They could care less about the mortgages. They seem to be just trying to get money into those tangible assets at this stage in the game. And I think everybody has a gut feeling that something's wrong here. And I can tell you that, I mean, I've worked with governments for 40 some years. I've advised from Europe to China. I was the one invited by China back in 1997 during the Asian currency crisis. Went over there, met with the central bank, etc. And you basically have seen on a global scale. When I've been in meetings and talking about the debt, their response over, I would say, the last 2 to 3 decades has been, yes, but we're different. I said, what's different? We're the government. And so they just assume they are AAA. They will not be chastised or anything else. So there's never been any fiscal responsibility that I can ever encounter. And look, when I was young and thought I could make a difference in government back in the 80s, it was quite enlightening. I mean, I was one of the, basically the top foreign exchange advisor. So I was invited when they were creating the G5 and the Plaza Accord. And so I went down in 85. I was one of 35, called in. And I thought initially, gee, I guess I made it finally, And you get there and it's like, gee, how do we save the world? Oh, very sorry, your 15 minutes is up. Next. And then you realize it's just a dog and pony show. They invited all these people that they all said we were all the top experts in our fields. And then they pretend to listen. And then when the last guy testifies, they stand up and say, these are our conclusions, which they made ahead of time.
Yeah.
So
this is the consultative approach, you mean, where we first feign a polling of masterminds and then go ahead with exactly that which we planned all along.
Yes, they pretend that they're actually listening to people, and they don't.
So it's process, just box ticking.
Yeah, pretty much. It's just they have an agenda. They're going to do it no matter what. And even these studies and stuff. I mean, I was told back then because I kind of got angry at it, and I wrote a letter to President Reagan at the time, and he had to respond because I was one of the people called in, and basically others, they got mad. They said, "Gee, you went out of committee. You should have stayed in committee. You could have been making $5-6 million a year. We would have given you these studies because every bill that passes, they need some sort of study, but they tell you what it's supposed to say.
Yeah, what the outcome is. Yes.
So like Obamacare. Oh, it's going to save $10 trillion over 50 years. I mean, this is all nonsense. But every bill that passes, that's what they need. They need somebody to do some fake study. And they give you the conclusions. And that's the way all this really works. So there's no real fiscal responsibility on anything.
Yeah. And there's a predetermined course, more importantly, which we think is to break everything down. So given all of this, you've convinced us on government malfeasance. I think we were preaching to the choir in the first instance anyway. So next step is, how does the rest of us, the viewers and the people engaged here, how do they go ahead and protect against what's likely to come out of this that we're seeing from the people that are actually making the decisions and managing this agenda?
Well, what they're doing is, I believe the war against Russia, really, which has been instigated by the West. I mean, Trump has said he could solve it in 24 hours, and he's actually correct. All you would have to do is tell Ukraine no more money, and you have to honor the Minsk agreement. That's what it was about. The Donbass was supposed to be allowed to vote on a separatist movement. Simple as that. And I couldn't believe that Merkel actually came out when a journalist asked her, why don't you enforce the agreement? She actually said, well, we didn't,
Never intended. Yeah.
To buy time for Ukraine to build an army. So
disgusting.
Yeah, I mean, you had Zelensky just go and meet with the Pope, and the Pope offered to step in and mediate. And he says, no, there's no mediation as long as Putin's there.
Rough. Yeah. Peace-seeking man of God.
Yes. I mean, look, I know Russia very well, and I was involved back in 99. They were trying to get me involved in that. But Putin is actually the moderate guy. And you remove him and just look at all the people behind him are the old hardline communists. And, they would step this thing up dramatically.
Yeah,
Putin's been under a lot of criticism in Russia because they feel that they should have went into Ukraine and dealt with it the same way as the U.S. did with Iraq.
Iraq, yeah. Shock and awe.
Yeah, and they said if you had done that, we would have won in 6 weeks. And he went in kind of like Vietnam. Oh, we don't cross this parallel, we lost, and I think that's, a very bad precedent for Russia as well.
He's a lawyer, you see, and he fancies adherence to legal agreements. He has his principle and his code, and he's not a shoot from the hip cowboy, actually, even though he's put forward as that.
Well, that's mostly propaganda, and you have to understand that in order to sell war, they always have to demonize the head of state. They did that to Saddam Hussein. They tried it with Assad. They did it to Donald Trump.
Yeah.
You got to beat him, so you turn him into some, devil's disciple.
Yeah.
And that's standard psychological warfare. That's what you do. But I mean, I was involved back in '99 when the neocons and the Clinton administration, they were actually behind the bankers trying to take over Russia back then. They were interfering in the Russian election of 2000. They set up Yeltsin for got him to basically take money from the IMF loans, which was $7 billion. And as soon as the wire went through Bank of New York, they ran to the DOJ and said, oh, Bank of New York just did the money laundering of $7 billion. And so then they tried blackmailing Yeltsin. You're not going to run in 2000. You're going to appoint their guy, who was Barasnovsky. Otherwise, all this is going to come out.
Yeah.
And that's why where Putin came in. Nobody ever heard of him. But at the same time, the communists were trying to use it to get rid of him. And so they had actually filed an impeachment motion against Yeltsin. So Yeltsin basically turned to Putin. That's where he came from, because he was not a communist and he wasn't not an oligarch.
Berezovsky came to a very, very, very murky end in London under some sort of legal, after, I think it's the same man, correct me if I'm wrong, after...
Oh, you're right.
Yeah.
But his
Uh,
bodyguard says that he was taken out by MI6.
yes, I think there's a lot that needs to come out on the truth behind the ones were potentially lined up to be leaders of Russia, and then suddenly lost all their assets, and then were tapered into a nothingness in a London London mansion. Anyway, back to what do people do? Okay, gold, physical things, digital things. What's your take on you were a hedge fund manager. Understanding the macroeconomics is clearly something you've got an incredibly good grip on. How does the layman, man in the street, prep financially for what's likely to happen? And are we not going to go through some sort of hell in a sort of Hegelian dialectic of immense problem that will get an equally proportionate mega reaction that will see us sign on for some rather dystopian, totalitarian solution? What's your take on the social aspect of that and financial asset retention? And part of this dovetails with the view I shared with you on bond markets. We were peak bonds at March 2020 with the eventual shutdown of the entire globe. That we've gone from searching for yield for 40 years to a capital preservation cycle as well. We're doing things where you're least likely to lose money and things are going to preserve value of now the new priority. Can you respond on that in the sort of financial context of positioning?
Yes, I think probably the number one thing you want to make sure you do is don't have any government investments, federal, state, local, whatsoever. There are no rules when it comes to government, all right? They can suspend debts. They can, Italy, when they got in trouble, if you bought, 90-day T-bills, they just converted and said, okay, they're now 10-year bonds. So government can do anything it wants. And, you can't prosecute them because they're the ones that prosecute everybody else. So you have to understand that. So this is a shift from public to private.
Yeah.
And as I mentioned, like with the real estate, that's why real estate has suddenly gone up a lot. A lot of people are just moving really into tangible assets. Yes, some of it is gold and silver, of course, but it's everything else too. Collectibles have been going up. You take that, real estate, pretty much anything that is physical. I would be very concerned about any digital type assets because when back in 1934, when Roosevelt confiscated gold, he didn't come knocking on everybody's door and say, "Give me all the gold in your sock box." What was confiscated was all assets of gold in banks and places that were recorded. They just went in there, and the banker is not going to say, "Gee, I'm not going to give you my client's money," because he would go to jail. They just, okay, fine, whatever you want. So, there are legal cases that all went up to the Supreme Court on it. They called them the gold clauses, where somebody signed a contract and you were supposed to pay in gold, and they were all nullified. So I would not be, I would say, be very cautious about, even if you have gold and silver, storing it in a known facility. Because, look, this whole move towards digital currency is basically, it's a war against the private sector.
Yeah.
They want, these digital currencies and including like Bitcoin or something like that, they will be confiscated. Do you really think they're going to allow any competition? It's just not going to happen. All right, this is an authoritarian type move. All right, so they will confiscate whatever cryptocurrencies you have, and the conversion rate will be up to them. We'll give you,
I can jump in. It does seem we have very similar minds. I love that you said it's essentially you are the mark, and it is statism versus the citizenry, first of all, on top of that. You've also said a couple of times they make whatever rules they want and they'll change them to suit them. So the game's rules changes depending as they lose valuable position. And then the other aspect is they want us all digital, and you're suggesting physical, but not within known grid that they can just show up with our cards and demand a clipboard of all the holders. So potentially gold should not, just a thought, gold is something you hold more personally. Silver, which is bigger, they're less likely to take, takes more space, you would maybe vault. So that's a possible tip out of that. I did interrupt your flow as well there, so sorry for that. Carry on, because that's a really useful. I just wanted to double emphasize very solid points you make. We're about to be facing the bending of rules, and people often think Bitcoin is going to be a safe haven. And I say have a little bit of it, but they can track it, they can surveil it, and if they're going to play dirty, as we expect they are, they could institute a degree of rule or tax or capital gains, or possibly even entire confiscation, and people shouldn't be shocked by that.
Oh, they will confiscate, because I mean, all you have to do is look at even what the Bank of England was suggesting with their digital. Oh, it should be able to. They pitched it. A mother should be able to control that if she doesn't want her child buying chocolate bars, that she should be able to turn that off. Well, if a mother can do that, they can do it. I mean, it's just the way they sell this stuff all the time. It was like Janet Yellen saying, oh, we're going to go down to $600 to go get the billionaires. I don't think Elon Musk is selling a used bike for $600 on eBay.
No.
This is, but they always pitch this stuff that way. I mean, I was in Australia and they put in this luxury tax. And the sales pitch was, we're going to go get all their fur coats, their Ferraris, and their French wines. And everybody go, yeah, go get them, make them pay. All right. Well, what was in it? All electrical products, including a phone, TV, you name it. If you confiscated all the money of all the billionaires, you don't even balance the budget for 1 year. So it's great.
Politics of envy. It's just to misdirect, weaponize the poor and lower income against the middle class, who is the biggest mark in this game, isn't it? It's divide and conquer and politics of envy.
Yes, it's look, 70% of the economy is basically small business. So I mean, that's really what you have to pay attention to. It's that's who they're after. You don't hire 87,000, IRS agents with guns to go after, 200, billionaires. I mean, let's get real.
Yeah.
And you have to be, understand what this is really about. I mean, as I said, I've been in government meetings for 40 years, and I'm in Europe, I'm in U.S., Asia, and it's always the same thing. They are never the problem. We are. And if everybody paid their taxes, then it would be okay. All right. You had Christine Lagarde, when she took a hold of the IMF, started threatening countries, if they didn't turn over all foreigners in banks, that they would be removed from the SWIFT system. So then they went after Switzerland and all the offshore, Panama, whatever. And it's just relentless. So they get all that money and it still doesn't change anything. They are the problem. And people, have said, oh, gee, we should go back to a gold standard. That's impossible. Because if you went to a gold standard, you'd have to have a balanced budget. How do they then run for office? Vote for me and I'll give you X, Y, Z. They can't.
Yeah.
It would change politics itself.
Yeah.
All right. And we're too far down the road for something like that.
Yeah.
So you can never have a fixed monetary system again. I mean, you have to abandon all this socialistic, propaganda, because that's how they win elections. Vote for me, and I'll give you this, that, and the other thing. It's always
It requires too much discipline. They will never accept the gold standard. So you mentioned property and your real estate agent, which is desperate to sell your unit to a New Yorker or a San Francisco refugee or someone fleeing the onslaught of the blue states. Aren't they going to also then surely rinse property owners out as well with wealth taxes, increase in privilege taxes for those that don't have any form of bandage? I mean, surely that's coming. In other words, every pocket where a middle-class person can do any form of wealth preservation shall be invaded by the barbarians.
It's mostly the blue states that are doing that. I mean, I'm in Florida, and I really do not want DeSantis to run for president. I'd rather have him just stay here. Thank you very much. Yeah. And let Trump go do that. That's fine. I think what you end up doing, and what I'm saying here, these are not my personal opinions. All right. Governments have defaulted all the time. They have never paid off their debts, other than Romania one time. That was it. Other than that, I mean, even the Continental Congress in the Constitution said that they would honor all the debts. They never did. All right. That's why you can buy continental currency on eBay. It was never redeemed. There has never been a case where a government pays off all its debt, other than Andrew Jackson did do it briefly before the Panic of 1837. But
and I think he's one of the presidents that didn't make it. He died, didn't he? One of three that were assassinated.
Yeah,
was it Garfield? Sorry, I might have.
Yeah, I don't think it was
along with Lincoln and anyone who mentions taking away the Fed's power invariably came to a sticky end. Yeah. So property, do you feel that being a property owner in a red state is enough, and that you'll be able to afford or hold off the extractors when they come for, let's say you have numerous properties, you rent a few out. Do you really think the state boundary line, I mean, DeSantis is seen at the Wailing Wall, he seems to be very Zio-friendly, visited Israel, etc. They all seem to be holding up the left hand and the right hand of this Punch and Judy show that is all orchestrated. And eventually the right folds into this dystopia as well. The Republican states can't avoid forever, because they're not going to want to see all the movement out of at a disorderly, watch it get disorderly, especially as you have the hairstyles of Newsom get ever more draconian and weird, like almost turning into Trudeau caricatures. This is just going to continue to accelerate this internal migration. How does it get balanced up? Or are they actually going to allow everybody to run to one side of a ship?
Well, that they haven't figured out yet. The IRS code showing that where they're actually getting money from, it has shifted. And there have been a tremendous exodus, particularly from California. I mean, when I lived in New Jersey, my father was a lawyer, and his former law partner told me, he says, look, you got to get out of the state. He says, if you die here, tell your family to drag your body across the river before they tell anybody. It was just that bad. I mean, I did a conference in Hong Kong, and they wanted 10% state income tax. What would you ever do for me other than give me tickets? Parking tickets in a private parking lot, no less. But effectively, just looking at this historically, usually this type of economic chaos is what, at the end of the day, countries will split. And the U.S. will split the same way as Europe. Even Russia. And you have to understand that you come together to form a society and then you split and move apart. Rome did that. Um, the probably the most significant thing that touched off the collapse of Rome was the Roman Emperor Valerian I. He was actually captured by the Persians in 260 AD and turned into a royal slave. And the Romans didn't have enough military power to go get him. So you see, that's when the monetary crisis cycle hit. And the silver and the coins disappeared within 8 years. Even go back to Caesar crossing the Rubicon. If you really look at it, most of them, it was a debt crisis. And the people cheered when Caesar crossed the Rubicon because they thought he would basically wipe out all the debts. And to the point that Mark Antony even went and bought Pompey's estate because he thought he would never have to pay for it. So, I mean, that was a debt crisis. When you ever get something along that line, somebody does cross the Rubicon. And the countries end up splitting. After Valerian was captured, that's when Rome split into 3 parts. You had the Gallic Empire, you had Zenobia, who they make cartoons of. She took the east and down to Egypt. So Rome split into 3 parts. We will see the same thing. You cannot hold this together because basically this is the agenda of the Biden White House.
Could you get a secession then of Texas and maybe Florida forming a conglomeration of the South? Literally, could the Confederate flag in a different guise reemerge?
Yes. Look, even the Confederacy, what was it really about? It was a little bit, from an economic standpoint, they wanted to end slavery. That was their workforce. All right. So if you ended up eliminating the slavery, then from their perspective, they were out of business. They didn't have a workforce to continue. And at the same time, that's when Russia abandoned basically its system and with serfdom. And because of that, all the serfs were set free in the 1860s. And by then, that's why Marxism took hold, because they didn't own anything because they had always been serfs. And the rich owned everything. That's true. All right. So then it was go get them. So you have to understand there is an economic background to a lot of this. So you're going to see the states divide, and it will be along generally the same lines as it was before. It will be the North versus the South in the United States. California, which wasn't a state at the time, will most likely join the North. And a lot of states in the Midwest will end up joining the South. So that's really what you're looking at. And historically, that's just the way it happens. Everybody agrees at one point, you come together. But the purpose of civilization is that everybody has to benefit.
But that could be a bifurcation in currency as well, couldn't it? I mean, if you think about the financial aspects, you've descaled America. So the blue states suddenly have a situation where they are effectively the biggest welfare spenders. That's not to say Republicans aren't pretty hawkish on the military-industrial complex and others. But traditionally, the Ron Paul, if we go back to a bit more traditional thinking, it's quite. You would probably have a bifurcation of currencies and a descaling to a certain degree of the significance of the two. The two would become a North and South. I don't want to say North and South Sudan, which is the most recent country that split. It would be a bit mean, but similar. There is a certain element of descaling and also a need for a splitting. You would have to have 2 central banks potentially as well.
Yes, I mean, hearing in Florida, we have balanced budget. We don't, DeSantis, um, we have no income tax, yet everything is paid for. I mean, it can be done.
Yeah.
And it's, I mean, I actually back in the '90s, I was working on Capitol Hill and tax reform, and I knew Dick Armey. Dick was for the flat tax, and Bill Archer, also Republican from the same state of Texas, was for the retail sales tax. Bill was the head of the House Ways and Means Committee. And I was the one going back and forth between the two. And I said, why don't we just sit down for dinner? No, can't do that. Why? Because everybody would think we're compromising. So
Yeah.
I'm the one going back and forth. The funniest thing was I ended up debating the tax issue at Princeton University. Steve Forbes was for the flat tax. I was there taking the middle ground. And on the other side was Jim Florio, the governor. And, basically he didn't see anything and he never wanted to tax. And I just said, look, I said, as far as the income tax is concerned, you people are borrowing from the poor and you don't even have the decency to pay them interest. Because what are you talking about? Because they all get refund checks, but you never pay interest on any of the money that you owe them. But if we owe you something, you want interest and penalties and all kinds of stuff. And I said, so you're basically exploiting the poor, and just to keep the budget going. And I was actually surprised, but Florio began to change his mind. And he said, I'd like to sit down and talk to you about this.
Yeah.
But, I mean, they don't look at this at all. It's always us against them, and we're always the bad guy.
Yeah. No, I agree. I absolutely concur with this. So preservation, gold, kept on your own. Property, you're still a fan of, but in the right places. What about the geopolitics of what might go down? There's always a distraction. And I've actually got a question from the community that's coming in as well. US default, it's always been pantomime and theater, political theater typically. Eventually they end up raising it. Could this be we cry wolf 10, 20, 30 times and we expect it always to be a false call. And this time the wolf comes and they actually gridlock us into a situation where they're actually, there is a default. Some people are
starting
to take the debt ceiling aspect seriously, while generally,
it's not actually a default. A default is you have no intention to pay it back. Okay, what it is more of a interest rate suspension. In 1937, the state of Illinois basically defaulted on their debt, but they repaid it. 1963. All right. England, they suspended their interest payments in 25, and so you've seen that sort of thing. But in 1931, you had countries that actually defaulted on their debt. Most of Europe, South America, and Asia, and you can buy a lot of their bonds, on eBay. They make very nice wall posters, and that's the real issue here with war. Why do they really want to go after Russia like this? Is they actually think that if they can create World War III, then they will be able to create the justification for the default on all the debt. And then you have Bretton Woods too. And you have the IMF already pitching that they will have a digital currency to replace the dollar. The dream is that the IMF will be the central currency of the world. I think that's extremely dangerous. The IMF is as corrupt as you would ever imagine. And I mean, look, I've been invited to IMF dinners just to show me that they got them in their pocket, and the bankers pay for it. This is the reality of everything, and actually, it's all just a dog and pony show. Edmund Saffer had rented the entire National Gallery in Washington and put on a dinner for the IMF. Now, it's illegal to buy a congressman or senator dinner. So they had everything you could want. Lobster tails, filet mignons, whatever. As long as we stood and we weren't sitting down, then it's an hors d'oeuvre and not dinner. I was holding the plate for Paul Volcker so he could cut his steak, and then he held the plate for me. I mean, this is how ridiculous it is.
Pantomime, yeah.
It really is. I mean, I had to work on Capitol Hill one night, and we were going to eat inside. It probably spent tens of thousands of dollars for the ethics committee to figure out how to handle it. I had to order a pizza from one place. They had to order pizza from a different place, and I was not allowed to give them a slice from my pie. I mean, as if they're going to change the law because here's a pizza, you want a slice of pizza? I mean, come on. I mean, they want millions of dollars in donations. They're not going to do something for a slice of pizza.
No. Well, they're fastidious on ridiculous detail that everybody sees, but then you have the Nancy Pelosi stock trading under the guise of her husband. You have Hildebrand, the Swiss National Banker's wife, being one of the Forex traders on the peg failure. So yeah, it is pantomime of honesty when the cameras are on. So Martin, thank you. It's been really entertaining listening to you. What would be your sort of, if you're counseling your grandkids of the future going through this situation, or your sons and daughters, what would be your 5-bullet plan that you'd say, do the following and you're going to come out okay on the other end of this draconian statist rules for me but not for thee game that seems to be the one that is in its ultimate perversion now, as the debt is so overwhelming? What would that 5-bullet plan consist of?
Well, you have to understand is that they definitely intend to default. That's kind of Schwab's pitch. You'll own nothing and you'll be happy.
But that's an asset stripping of us, which sees them become the eventual owner.
Trying to make it sound as if they're doing this for you. That you're burdened with your debt when it's really them. But, that's just, again, just part of the propaganda that they put out. But you have to understand that, and I know Schwab, I think he basically took his great reset from our computer model, which basically says that 2032, this all comes to an end anyhow. So he's just trying to push it into his direction. But the government will collapse. All these governments will. And because we've just taken it to the extreme, it can no longer be sustained. They will default. And so the real issue becomes, what kind of a government do we want afterwards? All right. And so I basically, encourage people to understand the different types of governments. Republics are notoriously the most corrupt. That's why Caesar crossed the Rubicon and he issued coins showing an elephant stamping on a snake. The snake was the Senate, right? So, anytime you get into something like that, it's just horrible. Our founding fathers thought they were creating the best kind of a system. You'd be there in Congress for only 2 years, and they only met for 6 weeks a year anyhow. So that was doable for a government by the people. But then they started paying themselves salaries, and that was it. And then they just write laws and exempt themselves from just about everything. So I would say, one, you have to understand we are looking at changing the very form of government. All right. And to be prepared for that.
Isn't it becoming more totalitarian? Isn't it
they're trying
using the opportunity, the crisis go to waste, even though it's a crisis of their own making that they're controlling the time, to seize ever greater control over humanity?
Yes, but I think you're going to see probably a worldwide revolution against that. They're going to fail. But, that's what I'm saying. After 2032, I mean, for the next 8 years, it's going to be getting worse and worse and worse. But these people are desperate. They know they're losing control. That's why they're getting more aggressive. They wouldn't be getting aggressive if they didn't fear losing that power, which is what's going on. I mean, you can look on our site. I put on a video clip. What really kind of started this is when Trump was elected. There was a video clip from the London Financial Times I put on there, and they were reporting from the WEF and how everybody was so upset that Trump won. And suddenly democracy was no longer democracy. It was popularity, populism. So Trump wasn't democratically elected. Oh, well, you fooled everybody, was populism. So anytime you vote against them, then it's not democracy. It's only democracy when they win. And that's basically the bottom line. But that's when they started getting really upset. They realized that they could be voted out. And so I seriously doubt you're going to see free elections. They're not going to allow you to do that. Even the last election, our computer said it was rigged. It was too much at stake. I don't think it was Dominion and whatever, but you have to understand that probably the one person who spoke truthfully on the question of elections was actually Joseph Stalin. He says you can vote whoever you want. The person that decides is the one who counts.
Yeah.
Look, this is what we're going through. They are getting aggressive because they know they're losing power. All right. And ever since 2016, when Trump was elected, that's when they realized this is going against them. So it's getting to this point where they were going to continue to seek more and more and more power. The digital currency thing is just an example. How are you going to hire a 16-year-old girl to be a babysitter from next door? How do you pay her? Where's our 50%? That's basically the way they look at it. And, you see somebody, a homeless guy asking for money. How do you give him money? If we're all digital, it's like, good luck, pal. You have a card reader, it's, it would change a lot, and, they're like pitching, it will end bank runs and it will end crime. So it all depends on what you're doing one way or another. But I think you're looking at this whole thing moving towards totalitarianism, yes, but they're not going to succeed. That will collapse, and then we're going to be left with the shambles and how to reestablish a new form of government. What do we really want? That's what comes after 2032.
Okay, well,
tangible assets that survive.
Tangible assets are the key. Something you can hold or own and title will survive, which you put to include physical property, homes, residential, clearly not commercial in New York, and also in the right areas, understandably, where you're less likely to get a draconian government regulations where there's a larger libertarian mindset, say the South, Texas, Florida, etc. Those will hold up well. You have concerns about Bitcoin and electronic assets that could be taxed or confiscated. And you like gold and silver, but held outside of known grid resources that are typical. If I were to summarize that, is that accurate?
Yes, on the silver, I would look for the old silver coins that were 1964.
Numismatic. Yeah.
Not that they're rare date or anything like that, but you have to understand that the person on the other side may not know what a silver bar is. I mean, there are videos there on YouTube showing offered a chocolate bar and silver, and they take the chocolate. Not everybody is well educated. When a silver coin, they go, oh, well, I know that's worth something if it's dated 64 or before. That's, a simpleton can understand that. So I would look at that, and they're also, because typically what you end up with are black markets.
Yeah.
And
I see that playing a big role, definitely. People organizing and forming black markets. Just equities, because if you own the certificate and you have the paper certificate, I'm assuming you're going to encourage people to do that. Surely you hold a business that can still survive. Let's say a miner, for example, that is pulling up silver or gold. Would that be a worthwhile asset category to have some skin in the game with as well, or would you concentrate it entirely in physical?
yes, now the companies that tend to survive are the ones that are going to have the tangible assets. Even if you look at Germany after the hyperinflation, they came out with a new currency in 1925, and it's backed by real estate.
Yeah.
They didn't have any gold or silver, so they used real estate. And that was very well accepted because, rare art, all sorts of things, stamps, coins, whatever. And that's what they used, and those things came back. I mean, they have a certain value to them, and they survive. What basically evaporates are simply the, I would say the good faith equity type thing. Oh, this company's gonna be worth a fortune. That stuff tends to go away.
Speculative stuff.
Yeah, I would just look at it from that perspective, and in the case of Germany, they were using other people's currency other than their own. So ironically, you might be looking at currencies that do survive, even like the Chinese yuan, for example.
That tendency to associate commodities and physical things, potentially.
Yeah, I mean, the dollar has been mainly the reserve currency because paper dollars, about 70% of them circulate outside the United States. People have used them as a hedge against their own government. That may flip. All right. And it seems to be more from the, people like asking, gee, you think the BRICS can really, what's happening here is that, the sanctions against Russia were highly illegal, and they not only did they basically escalate inflation. When you started confiscating the assets of individual people and say, oh, well, you supported Putin. So what is that? Well, I can confiscate all your assets because you voted for Trump.
It's an incredible precedence, and it is an escalator of the de-dollarization. It was one of the most aggressive escalators. When you combine it with the panic pullout on Afghanistan, which points to the loss of confidence in the ability to militarily assert and to fund that particular war, and then you combine it with the financial weaponization, I think that has to go as the two perfect combination on two fronts for the acceleration of de-dollarization and people's openly willingness to reject and look for alternatives to the dollar. We talk about the weakest in the room, and as much as we expected a bit of de-dollarization, we fear Japan is the most interesting of the majors for being on the wrong side of everything. Many people say 11 years ahead of America, although I'd argue, given their equity market peaked in 89, on that front, in terms of assets and financial engineering, they're probably 30 or 40 years ahead of America. But and their belligerence in holding rates at 0.5% on their debt, in essence, means the currency is the release valve for virtually 300% debt to GDP, terrible demographics, only 0.91 kids, only lower is South Korea. Is this the biggest, ugliest leper in this leper colony of synchronized, financially over-leveraged debt bombs of the majors? Obviously, FX emerging a lot thinner, a lot harder to act on. In terms of the majors, what's your take and how does it go? Because they do not have the exorbitant privilege. And could we actually see a yen crisis before a dollar one?
Oh, yes, the dollar will be the last. Europe is even worse, mainly because you have very diverse economies there, and they're trying to keep it all together as one. And that tends to be more of a splitting up effect that you're looking at. Japan, the reason you have that problem in Japan is that the Japanese government, it stems actually going back to their religion, and where the emperor was God. And what happened was the government then kind of supplanted the emperor. So, I mean, I dealt with companies, and for 89, we were called in by, even the Postal Savings Fund. They wanted to hedge the market. Our computer was saying this was it. We were going to go down. And one day I met with basically $3 trillion there in portfolios that day. And they all wanted to hedge. We put together the hedge, proposals. This is how we do it. And Minister of Finance stepped in. They said, no, you can't short anything, and because that would make the market go down. So one client that had $1.5 trillion portfolio lost a third of it within the first 90 days. So when I said, you're just going to not do this because the government asked you not to, well, this is the way we have to do it here. So it's like the government is almost like God. If they said don't, you can't. Simple as that. It wasn't a rule or against it or anything like that. It was more of a tradition. So that's the problem with Japan. I mean, the government keeps the interest rates low. Well, everybody complies and they will do what we ever tell them to do. It's almost a very totalitarian aspect, but without the law creating that.
Gotcha. Yeah. So, and they're very compliant as well, as you implied there in all of that. Excellent. Martin, this has been really enjoyable. Thank you so much for your time. How do people who wish to engage with your newsletter and other products, how do they stay in touch with you or on the socials? Please give us the layout.
Well, they can go to armstrongeconomics.com. We keep the site open. You don't have to register. You don't get a whole bunch of emails, and we don't sell advertising. It's mainly for public service, really. And
very kind.
So you can go there, and then from there you can find other things. But that's basically what we try to provide, because we've been mostly an institutional advisor, and so we kind of open things up for the retail public.
Well, is there any difference, by the way, as you mentioned that you're an institutional advisor? What are you saying to businesses out of curiosity that's different than what we might have discussed today for an individual?
Not really. It's just how do you approach, like I can say, okay, fine, short gold. Well, what do you do when you have, $1 trillion? Yeah. It's too big. You have to step in and step out, spread things around, and you have to look more on a global scale. So it's not, as easy, I would say, as a retail person say, gee, well, I just buy gold. Well, that's very nice, but an institution can't do that. So it's different from that size and scale more than anything. And most of them are kind of oblivious to really what the real trends are. I've been called into, so many different crises that institutions because they didn't act, or they acted on something you read in a newspaper.
Yeah, they didn't. It's too late. Out of the geographic, you're talking about geographic diversification here. Which are the best places, given that it's the West that seems to be setting up for a proper bar? We actually like Singapore, although the compliance level is very high and it's a very strong, dominant government. And we think there's a lot of money or capital formation that's going to end up in the Middle East. Again, pretty live by their own rules to a degree. But where is the of all the options available to you, which is probably the least bad choice for, I don't know, vaulting some gold or maybe even moving and living to there? There's a difference to that. But
A lot of people are moving to like Mexico. They were the ones that didn't have any COVID restrictions. So they were the freest country around, and they ended up with the biggest immigration. So there are towns there with all expats that you can go to, etc. I find it curious that Russia's offering some towns now for expats to also go over there. So it's very diverse, but the main thing is that you want to be away from the draconian types. I mean, what we're looking at, particularly in the blue states, they're only going to get worse.
Correct.
They will get more authoritarian, seize more things to try and retain power.
Yeah.
And as that begins to skip and basically go from between their fingers, they only get worse. I mean, that's what history teaches us. And this is how civilizations die.
Yeah. Interesting you mentioned Russia. I saw that tweet. They're actually establishing conservative family-orientated zones for American and Canadian expats to settle in, which is the great irony of a reverse Bolshevism, because inherently you've got the original sufferers under Bolshevism turning to offering enclaves of family values to ex-capitalist nation immigrants, potentially. And I could see them actually being rather successful as well in time.
Well, believe it or not, I've actually heard people in Washington say that Russia should be taken down because they're anti-woke. That they don't support abortion and all these things. Also, they're horrible and they should be taken down. They're too much of an orthodox Christian country. I mean, that's how far things have gone.
Yeah. Imagine doing that because, destroying a country because of its ideology. Yeah. It's been fascinating. Thank you so much again for your time, Martin. Final goodbye from me. Any passing last comment that you'd like to make before we call time?
No, I think, just hunker down, understand what's happening, and we will have to redesign government after 2032.
And that's what you're thinking of in terms of your leading role, I suppose, as someone who's been at the forefront and of many things, including AI. We didn't touch on AI. I'm going to ask you, I have to, I suppose, given that you've done. Are we not facing a degree of it's a bit like the nuclear bomb with AI? We've opened that Aladdin's cave, so to speak, and let that chimera out with AI. Do we win against this? Because you're quite optimistic. You see eventually the force of the people pushing back and reigning back over draconian totalitarian state that actually have the handles on so many powerful weapons, such as the military, the police, the enforcement. We already saw in the March 2020 events how they were able to get so much compliance. What do you see as the outcome on AI? Do we put a leash on it, and does it get contained to an acceptable degree, or does it run amok, and are we all victims?
I'll put it this way. There is a theory that they started with these neural nets, that our brain is just a supercomputer and that's it, really. Yeah. And so they actually think, and most of these movies are based upon this theory, that if you throw enough information in, suddenly it becomes conscious.
Yeah. In other words, we have no spirit. We are just templates, a whole smorgasbord of album templates for how we can choose to elect to respond to different situations. And instead of having a soul or anything of essence, we are just a certain, because of life experience, learned, programmed responses. And that you can now get a machine that can capture, listen, and take and absorb an entire database of people's existences into having this combined collective, that it in essence becomes spirit, not that they acknowledge that, but a kind of, what do they call it? There's a word for it, not clear, sentience.
I don't believe that's possible, that it actually wakes up and says, gee, it's me versus you. I don't
Yeah.
see that. Our system, I basically taught it what I knew, how I would analyze and things of this nature. But it's not off and running and trying to do what Chat GPT is doing, that answering every question and exploring the world. This is just confined to its database for the world monetary system. That's it. And I don't see the advantage of taking something like Chat and then tying it into defense systems and things of this nature. That I agree with. You shouldn't be doing that. You don't know, using neural nets, it is kind of a black box in the sense that you don't know where or how it would actually develop. My system is not a neural net. I looked at that a long time ago, and I decided not to go that way. Mine basically is just simply, I taught it how to analyze. I put my experience in, and I put in all the database and said, okay, fine, go off and correlate everything in the world. But it's limited to financial markets. It's not into, it writes over 1,000 reports on financial markets around the world all by itself.
I see. What's its key finding, by the way? What's the thing that's popping that it keeps bumping into that seems to be omnipresent in that?
Basically 2032.
Yeah,
it shows that exactly what we've been talking about.
Yeah.
Probably the first thing I would say that really impressed me was back in the early 80s. It came out and it said the British pound was going to drop from 240 to par, and that Britain, the economy would flip and realign with Canada and the United States. And I thought, gee, that's awful. And, if I had to create, natural language to be able to communicate with it, why are you coming up with this? And it was very interesting. It picked up the North Sea oil, which just started in 1977, and went 2 years of data, it realized it's going to completely flip. And Britain left Europe and moved towards, because it was a commodity-based economy.
Yeah.
So things like that, from a correlation standpoint, it could see it. Yes, a human might, but how much longer would it have taken us to figure that out?
And any economies that you see flipping or anything similar to that example that you see right now on a nation state basis?
The West is in a decline. We're looking at a significant decline in Western civilization. I mean, we put out that forecast about 10 years ago. And a lot of people didn't like it, but it said, look, China will end up becoming the world's financial capital of the world. They said, oh, how can you do this? Look, this is what it's coming up with. And as time goes by, we can see how that's happening. The U.S. is basically destroying itself.
Yeah. Oh, absolutely. And in fact, I'd argue it's accelerating now. It goes slowly and then suddenly. It would have been harder to believe 10 years ago than it is today. It's absolutely accelerating.
I can tell you the military facility that governs the Middle East is here in Tampa. And there was a team there that Trump ordered how to get out of Afghanistan. They had it all worked out. When Biden came in, basically anything that Trump did, they had to do the opposite. He dismissed the whole team and just did it himself.
Yeah. Cut
If
and
Trump
run.
was wrong, we have to go the opposite. It's just, I never saw anything so irresponsible in my life. It wasn't whether it was good or bad. If Trump did it, we have to do the opposite.
If I'm reading your general mood, you'd be quite happy with DeSantis staying in Florida and Donald Trump winning the next election if you felt that was allowable. Do you think it is possible, or do you think he'll be stopped?
Oh, I think he would be stopped. But I mean, in all honesty, Washington is so corrupt. Trump probably would be the best guy because now he knows the game.
Yeah.
And he would, they asked me if I would talk to Trump and talk him out of running in 24, and if I would be interested in advising DeSantis. I mean, I went over to go meet him, and I told him, I said, look, I don't want to get involved. Why? I said, because you make DeSantis president, and what's going to happen? You're going to eat him for lunch the same way you did to Trump.
Yeah.
People don't understand how it really works in Washington. I was also part of the vetting process. I would go meet with people who wanted to be president. They would send me in, and I would go meet with them, and they were told I was there to advise them on the world economy, but in truth, it was like, I come back, well, what do you think? Do you think he can handle it? It was all about where they were intelligent enough. Then I was asked in 99 to go down and meet with Bush Jr. I said, yeah, okay, fine. And I was told, I swear to God at that point, no, this one's different. I said, what's different? Oh, he's really stupid. And I was like, what?
So,
and then I was actually asked if I would be, take the position of chief economic advisor in the White House. I said, no, I'm not interested in that. They picked the cabinet. They picked Cheney. And that's what they did to Trump. When Trump went in, you have to realize we need people with experience to give confidence, to your administration. They stuffed it with all the neocons. And every one of them were stabbing him in the back from John Bolton all the way down. And, so that's where he's probably better suited for it now because now he knows the game. You take anybody else, they're going to go through the same process. Oh, gee, okay, fine. And they will stuff the cabinet and we'll get an absolute abomination again.
Well, I don't think it could accelerate any faster than under a second term of Biden. But who knows? Maybe we'll.
Oh, he's their absolute dream candidate. He just reads the cue cards when he can, and he signs whatever they stick in front of him.
Indeed. On that rather grim note, let's hope for better. Thank you for the optimism. Amazing time chatting with you. Very delighted to have you. One more time, it is ArmstrongEconomics.com, is it?
Yes.
ArmstrongEconomics.com. Go and check it out. Lots of free blogs, great information, and I've really enjoyed today and learned a lot. Thank you, Martin.
Well, thank you for inviting me.
Absolute pleasure. Bye-bye for now.
Goodbye.